Hello and welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are plunging headfirst into something that is truly universal, something we all grapple with, the science of drive, and maybe more importantly, the science of the slump.
That's right. We're talking about that really frustrating feeling that, that lack of get up and go when finding the energy to just start something, even something important, feels completely impossible.
It really does, and it happens to everyone.
To everyone, from the highest performing executives to, the most dedicated artists.
Absolutely. And our mission today is to sort of pull apart why motivation fades. Because what we found in our sources, this whole stack of material covering brain chemistry, psychology, emotional intelligence, all of it, is that the issue is much, much more complicated than just not having enough willpower.
Oh, that is maybe the biggest myth we need to bust today.
Right.
And we're going to prove that by showing you the biological and psychological levers you can actually pull. We'll start with the foundational science of motivation, what's really happening chemically in the brain. Then we'll move into the essential framework of emotional intelligence, which we kind of see as the navigation system for all these feelings.
Right.
We'll dissect the nature of fear and self-doubt, those huge internal roadblocks, and then we'll wrap up with a powerful, integrated action toolkit. The goal is to help you build sustainable resilience and navigate these barriers effectively.
Okay, let's unpack this. Starting with the foundation. What motivation fundamentally is. We tend to think of it just as, wanting something, but the sources suggest it's a dedicated psychological process.
It certainly is. Motivation isn't some singular spark. It's the entire complex psychological process that initiates that first step, guides your effort through the middle, and then sustains that effort toward a specific goal until you're done.
So it's the internal engine.
It's the internal engine that moves you from intention to action.
Exactly.
And when we talk about that engine, the sources usually define it by where the fuel comes from, right? The intrinsic versus the extrinsic drive. Precisely. And we need both, but they function very, very differently. So intrinsic motivation is doing something purely because you enjoy the process itself. You're pursuing a hobby or a task for the inherent satisfaction, the pure joy, or because it aligns with your values.
Like a musician practicing just because they love the sound, not because they're getting paid for a gig.
That's the perfect example. And then you've got extrinsic motivation, which is completely driven by external factors. That could be rewards, money, praise, a promotion, or the desire to avoid punishment or some negative consequence.
So extrinsic is great for getting you started or hitting a short-term deadline, I'd imagine.
It is. But the sources all seem to agree that it's that intrinsic drive, that deep enjoyment and sense of purpose that sustains effort over the long term.
Okay, but did the research talk about the trade-off? I've heard that an external reward can actually kill intrinsic motivation. Is that true?
That is a really nuanced and fascinating area. And yes, it absolutely can. If you take a task that a person already loves to do so, high intrinsic motivation, and then you introduce a large, controlling, external reward, that person's internal enjoyment often just diminishes. They shift their focus from the satisfaction of the task itself to getting the reward.
Right.
Psychologists call it the overjustification effect. And if you suddenly take that reward away, they often stop doing the task entirely, even though they used to love it.
Wow. So if you love to draw, and then suddenly someone pays you $100 for every sketch, you stop drawing for fun and you only draw when the money's on the line.
That's it. It's a powerful warning about how we structure incentives,
It really is.
It teaches us that for complex tasks, things that require creativity and sustained effort, focusing on the intrinsic factors, autonomy, mastery, purpose, is usually a much more sustainable approach than just dangling a big carrot.
Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting for me. What is physically happening in our brains when we feel that rush of motivation, or, the opposite, when we feel that flat, apathetic slump?
This is foundational neuroscience. Our brain's reward system is absolutely central, and dopamine. Well, it plays the starring role. But here is the critical, often misunderstood insight from the sources.
Okay.
Dopamine isn't primarily about the pleasure you feel after you get the reward.
Wait, I always thought dopamine was the pleasure chemical.
It's not, really.
Yeah.
Dopamine is primarily the seeking chemical. It's about signaling the anticipation of a reward.
Oh, interesting.
And that expectation is what creates desire, it initiates movement, and it makes you willing to put in the effort. When you're motivated, your dopamine system is basically signaling, hey, that goal over there, that's worth the energy.
So it's the chase. It's the signal that something good is coming that actually gets us off the couch and through the first few steps. If that signal is weak, starting feels impossible.
Exactly. When you feel unmotivated, it often just means your brain isn't sending strong enough anticipation signals relative to the effort required. Biologically, we rely on this really sophisticated network. It's centered on the prefrontal cortex, the PFC.
The planning, decision-making part.
Right, the rational part. And it works with the limbic system, which manages all our emotions and rewards. When those two are perfectly synced, motivation feels natural. Your rational brain decides a goal is important, and your limbic system just screams, go get it.
And when they're out of sync, or the chemistry is off, that's when starting feels like pushing a boulder uphill. So what specifically throws that delicate dopamine function off balance?
There are several major disruptors, and they're pretty common in modern life. Chronic stress is probably the biggest one.
Right.
When you're constantly stressed, your body's just pumping out high levels of cortisol. And that chronic exposure doesn't just make you anxious, it physically suppresses dopamine production in the very areas responsible for motivation. That's why chronic stress leads to that flat, listless, apathetic feeling. The fuel for that seeking behavior is literally being choked off.
So we're paying a biological debt for long-term psychological pressure.
Precisely. And lack of sleep is another huge one. Even one night of poor sleep can make your dopamine receptors less sensitive. The reward is still out there, but your brain just doesn't respond as well to those crucial anticipation signals.
It's like turning the volume down on your internal motivation music.
Perfect analogy. And we can't forget the foundational fuel, right? Poor nutrition plays a massive part too. If your system is low on the building blocks needed for neurotransmitters, things like tyrosine, omega-3s, vitamins B6 and D,
The raw materials.
your brain literally doesn't have what it needs to synthesize enough dopamine, serotonin, or norepinephrine.
It's a chemistry lab, and if the inventory is low, production slows down.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we also have to acknowledge that sometimes the issue is deeper, involving neurological conditions, things like major depressive disorder, anxiety, ADHD, Parkinson's. They all involve direct issues with those dopamine pathways. Motivation takes a significant hit.
And depression, for instance, often presents with something called anhedonia.
Right, which is the reduced ability to feel pleasure or find interest in things that were once enjoyable. That's a direct chemical impact.
It makes the point crystal clear. Motivation is genuinely not just a mindset thing. It involves real, measurable, observable brain chemistry.
Which then brings us to the psychological overlay. And this raises an important question. If our drive has this physical foundation, how does psychology explain the choice we make to act or the reasons we decide a goal is even worthwhile?
This is where psychology gives us those frameworks to explain the human layer. Let's start with one called expectancy value theory.
This one is beautifully straightforward. It basically argues that your motivation to pursue any task is a product of two core factors. First, expectancy. Your belief in your ability to succeed at the task. Can I actually pull this off?
And second, value. How much you actually care about the outcome or how important it is to you.
And the key insight here is that motivation is a multiplicative product. So if either expectancy or value is zero,
motivation drops to zero.
Exactly. If you don't think you can do it, low expectancy, or you don't care about the result, low value, you won't bother starting. Even if the other factor is super high, you need both.
That immediately gives us a really useful diagnostic tool, doesn't it? If I'm stuck, I need to ask, do I doubt my abilities, which is an expectancy issue, or is this goal just not truly important to me, a value issue?
It forces you to look at the right problem. Then there's another essential framework, one that really dissects intrinsic motivation. Self-determination theory, or SDT. This theory argues that our natural, inherent, intrinsic drive thrives when three basic psychological needs are met. If they aren't met, we shift from acting because we want to acting because we have to.
Okay, so what are those three core needs again?
The first is autonomy. Feeling like you have control of your own actions. Feeling that you're the author of your choices, not just following orders.
Okay.
Second is competence. Feeling capable and effective at what you do, having the skills and seeing yourself succeed. And third is relatedness. Feeling connected to other people, feeling supported, and belonging to a group or a community.
I can see how micromanagement, for example, could just completely destroy all three at once.
Oh, that's a perfect example. A micromanaging boss undermines autonomy because they dictate the how and the when, stripping away your sense of choice.
Right.
This, in turn, undermines competence because if you never get to try things your way and fail safely, you never develop true mastery. And if the environment is overly controlled and distrustful, relatedness suffers because you don't feel like a valued, connected member of the team.
So if any one of those is missing, that inner fire just sputters out.
It does. The crucial point from SDT is that if any of those three needs is undermined, the task becomes a chore, an obligation.
That explains why people often hate tasks that are imposed on them, even if the task itself is interesting. They lose that sense of authorship.
Precisely. They might have the skill and maybe the right connections, but the sheer lack of autonomy just sucks all the energy out of the effort.
And finally, we can link this back to practical application with goal-setting theory.
Right. Decades of research show how critical, clear, specific, and challenging goals are. They provide direction, they focus your attention, and they energize you. If your goals are nebulous, like I want to do better, your PFC literally doesn't know what resources to allocate or where to even begin.
But the flip side is also important, right? Goals that are too vague or ones that feel utterly impossible, they just lead to frustration and you plummet before you even begin.
Absolutely. The sources remind us that the goal must be challenging enough to be motivating, but still perceived as achievable enough to satisfy that expectancy component we talked about.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. We've got the science and the underlying psychological theories, but let's look at the everyday, immediate stuff that gets in our way, the common roadblocks that make us feel stuck.
The first, and maybe the most easily fixed, is simply the lack of clear goals. We already touched on this, but let's unpack the real-world consequence. When your aim is fuzzy, you don't know the path, and that ambiguity just feeds procrastination because your brain can't prioritize.
The source material had that fantastic example of Sarah, the graphic designer. She felt totally stalled because her goal was just advanced career, which is effectively meaningless to the brain's planning center.
Exactly. Her desire, her value was high, but her expectancy was low because the task was overwhelming and undefined. She was stuck in inaction until she nailed it down to something specific, measurable, and time-bound. Complete a UI/UX certification within 6 months and apply for 3 intermediate roles.
That's a real plan.
It is. That clarity, that specificity, allowed her to make a step-by-step plan, which in turn dramatically reignited her drive. The insight here is crucial. Specificity gives motivation a map to follow.
What about that feeling of being completely run down? We mentioned chronic stress, but let's talk about burnout and overwhelm as a major roadblock in today's work environment.
Burnout is so much more severe than just being tired. It's a state of deep emotional, physical, and mental exhaustion that results from long-term, unrecovered stress.
Right.
It's important to distinguish between acute stress and chronic stress. Acute, moderate stress can actually motivate you. It sharpens your focus before a deadline, but it has to be followed by recovery.
Eustress versus distress, right?
Chronic stress, however, pushes your system into survival mode. We go back to that neurochemistry. Sustained cortisol production actively suppresses the dopamine pathways you need for goal-directed behavior. The person starts experiencing emotional depletion, cynicism toward their work, and a profound loss of efficacy.
Like that software developer in the sources who originally loved coding, but after weeks of insane hours and impossible deadlines, just lost all passion.
Their brain literally couldn't find the motivation signal anymore. The insight is that constant demand without proper recovery doesn't build resilience, it depletes everything. You can't motivate a system that is biologically exhausted.
So let's talk about lack of autonomy again. If self-determination theory is true, then having your choices taken away is an active demotivator.
It's worth stressing because it is so common. Feeling controlled, whether it's through extreme micromanagement, rigid systems, or tasks imposed without explanation, it just kills internal investment. When you lose that sense of personal choice, the task shifts instantly from something you own to something you resent.
It strips the person of their identity within the task.
It turns an intellectual challenge into an obligation, and obligations rely purely on external factors, like avoiding getting fired, which, as we discussed, are pretty fragile motivators.
What about our environment? Does our physical or digital space play a role in sapping our drive?
A surprisingly massive one. Your environment is either your co-pilot or your saboteur. Environmental distractions, a cluttered desk, constant phone pings, distracting background noise, they all fragment your attention.
And switching costs.
The switching cost, exactly. Every time you switch focus, even for a second, you drain precious cognitive resources you need for deep work.
And what about the digital drain from, like, social media?
That's fatigue by novelty. Passive social media scrolling is designed to give you small, immediate dopamine hits. This constant, low-level stimulation fatigues the brain's capacity for sustained focus. When you finally turn to the difficult long-term goal, your brain is already tired from processing hundreds of irrelevant signals.
The insight is clear. The environment profoundly shapes our focus. Like that writer who couldn't concentrate in a noisy cafe but found focus in a quiet library with notifications off. It's not about willpower, it's about reducing friction.
Precisely. We need to consciously shape our spaces to enable focus, rather than forcing our depleted brains to resist constant temptation.
Now, let's transition to the internal psychological barriers. We have to talk about the dynamic duo of fear of failure and its close cousin, perfectionism.
They are arguably the #1 reason people refuse to initiate difficult tasks. The amygdala, our brain's little alert system, sees potential failure as a true threat to our status or self-worth, and it triggers an avoidance response.
It makes the task feel genuinely risky.
It does, which leads to delay or outright paralysis. And perfectionism is the ultimate self-sabotage. It's that cognitive trap where you feel you can't begin unless you can guarantee it will be perfect, which is, of course, impossible.
So you endlessly postpone the start?
You postpone, citing the need for more research or better preparation. We saw the case study of Mark, the college student, who avoided writing essays not because he lacked skill, but because he was terrified they wouldn't be perfect. He associated a B with personal inadequacy.
And what helped him break that paralysis?
The solution was in cognitive behavioral techniques, learning to reframe mistakes. He stopped viewing a mistake as a sign of failure and started seeing it as a necessary step in learning a data point. He adopted the mantra of draft, don't perfect.
Right.
The crucial insight here is that aiming for perfect actively stops progress. The old adage that good enough is far better than never started becomes a necessary tool for overcoming that inertia.
Let's talk about low self-efficacy. It sounds like general confidence, but the sources make a clear distinction.
They do. Self-efficacy is not general confidence. That's a global feeling about yourself. Self-efficacy is your belief in your own ability to succeed at a particular specific task.
Okay.
So I might have high self-efficacy for cooking, but low self-efficacy for public speaking. I'm confident generally, but I specifically doubt my ability to perform that one task. And low self-efficacy often stems directly from perceived past failures.
So how do you actively build this specific belief?
It's built through what Albert Bandura called mastery experiences. It's about achieving small, specific wins, using positive reinforcement, and actively acknowledging past achievements that relate to the current goal. Here's a simple, actionable exercise. Write down a few recent, moderately challenging things you've successfully done and reflect on the specific skills you used.
So you're building a mental evidence file of your own competence.
That's exactly it. The core insight is, believing you can is the necessary first step to starting.
What about those pervasive negative thought patterns? Cognitive distortions sound like the brain running an unhelpful looping script.
They are irrational, unhelpful patterns of thinking that systematically sabotage your motivation and mood. They aren't signs of weakness. They're faulty shortcuts your brain takes. All or nothing thinking is a big one. If I can't do this perfectly, I won't bother trying at all.
No middle ground.
No middle ground. And catastrophizing, blowing one potential negative outcome way out of proportion.
That's the voice that says, if this proposal doesn't get approved, I'll be fired and my career is over.
Exactly. It takes a minor setback and projects it into total ruin. Or overgeneralization, taking one instance, say, struggling with one presentation, and making it a universal truth, like, I'm terrible at public speaking and I always will be.
And the solution here involves those cognitive behavioral therapy techniques again, right?
Absolutely. The primary technique is to challenge the thought directly. You interrupt the distortion and you ask, what is the actual objective evidence for this thought? What is the most likely outcome? Not the catastrophic one. By logically dismantling the distortion, you remove its power to halt action.
You have to edit that internal script.
You do. Massively.
Let's move on to the deeper impactors that feed into chronic low motivation. You mentioned mental health challenges, and it's critical to underscore that these are not just simple emotional states.
They are not. Persistent low motivation can be a clinical symptom. As we noted, depression involves profound low energy, fatigue, and that anhedonia, the reduced capacity to experience pleasure. When the reward system is chemically dampened by depression, asking someone to just push through is ignoring the underlying biological reality.
Right.
And similarly, anxiety creates such intense worry about potential negative outcomes that the only way to feel safe is through avoidance.
And ADHD directly impairs those critical executive functions, the brain skills needed for planning, organizing, prioritizing, and, crucially, for initiating tasks.
This is why the sources stress that for people experiencing persistent, severe motivational issues, professional help therapy, medication coaching is essential. We heard about Emma, the artist with depression. No amount of goal setting alone would have fixed her situation. She needed clinical help alongside starting with tiny, almost meaningless creative steps just to rebuild her capacity for enthusiasm.
So the insight is that persistent low motivation can be a symptom of an underlying health issue needing expert attention, not just a failure of character or willpower.
Yes.
Another fundamental roadblock, which we can look to philosophy for, is a lack of purpose or meaning.
This one is enormous. When tasks feel disconnected from your deeper values, your identity, or a long-term vision you genuinely care about, they feel like chores. They actively drain energy instead of providing it. This is the core message of Viktor Frankl's work, right? When we have a strong why, we can endure almost anyhow.
We have to connect the mundane day-to-day work to that grander narrative.
That's right. And it might not be saving the world, but it could be that the repetitive job provides security for your family, or that the difficult task is developing a skill absolutely necessary for a more fulfilling role 5 years from now.
I'm thinking of Priya, the case study who is unmotivated by the career her family wanted.
Yes. She found tremendous, relentless drive when she shifted her efforts toward community activism, a pursuit that aligned deeply with her personal values of social justice.
A strong why can help you endure almost anyhow.
And finally, we can't underestimate foundational physical health factors. We mentioned nutrition and sleep, but let's talk about underlying conditions.
Right, like hypothyroidism, chronic fatigue syndrome, or even simple nutritional deficiencies, low B12, iron, vitamin D. They can all directly cause fatigue and low vitality. The example of the office worker with persistent, unexplained low energy who was eventually diagnosed with a severe vitamin D deficiency. That's a powerful reminder.
It is. You cannot expect peak mental performance or consistent motivation from a system that is physically depleted. Your physical state, your hydration, sleep debt, and nutrient levels is the indispensable foundation for your mental drive. If the foundation is shaky, the whole psychological structure will crumble.
Okay, so we've established that motivation is the engine, driven by chemistry and shaped by psychology. If that's the engine, emotional intelligence seems to be the essential navigation system, crucial for making decisions, regulating our response to setbacks, and sustaining pressure.
This is Section 3, and it's perhaps the most important skill set for resilience. Emotional intelligence, or EI, is defined as the ability to recognize, understand, manage, and influence emotions, both your own feelings and those of others.
It's all about emotional and social skills, which makes it distinct from traditional IQ.
Exactly. IQ measures logic and reasoning. EI is about emotional literacy. And while it's a huge business buzzword now, its origins are firmly in academic psychology.
Right. It was formally defined in the 90s.
Yes, by psychologists Peter Salovey and John DeMeyer. But it was Daniel Goleman's book in '95 that really popularized the notion, making the compelling argument that EI could matter more than raw IQ for overall life success, leadership, and happiness.
The difference between being technically brilliant and being capable of leading people.
That's a great way to put it.
So let's break down Goleman's widely known 5-component model, starting with the bedrock, self-awareness.
Think of self-awareness as being a skilled investigator of your inner world. It's the capacity to know precisely what you are feeling, why you are feeling it, and how that specific emotion affects your thoughts, and crucially, your actions. It requires tuning into your physical and mental state without judgment.
The benefit of that internal clarity is huge. It means you're less likely to react impulsively or be blindsided by your own moods.
Precisely. If you are a manager and you realize your sudden frustration with a team member is actually about your own unrealistic deadline pressure, not their performance, that self-awareness allows you to halt the destructive reaction.
So building on that self-awareness comes the second component, self-regulation.
This is the control panel. It's managing those emotions effectively, controlling disruptive impulses, adapting to change, and staying calm under stress. It's the pause button. If self-awareness tells you, I am angry, self-regulation is the ability to choose how you express or contain that anger rather than letting it control you.
I'm thinking of a teacher maintaining patience with a persistently disruptive student rather than losing their temper. It's about creating that moment of space to choose a response.
And that ability to pause and choose builds incredible resilience because setbacks don't trigger those automatic emotional spirals.
Okay, component three is intrinsic motivation. We've talked about this as a concept, but Goleman actually integrates it as a core EI component.
It does, because it requires managing your internal state to prioritize purpose and personal passion over all the external noise. It's that inner passion to pursue goals that mean something personally, showing a goal focus, optimism, and a deep commitment to learning and improvement, even when things are difficult.
This sounds like the ability to self-generate that dopamine anticipation signal, regardless of an immediate external reward.
It is. It is the internal commitment that drives the athlete to train relentlessly through an injury, or the scientist to pursue research despite multiple failures. Their drive is rooted in the process and the pursuit of mastery, not just the prize at the end.
Fourth, empathy. This is often reduced to just being nice, but the sources break it down into much more useful layers, don't they?
They do. Empathy is the ability to understand and share the feelings of others, to step into their shoes. And the three types are crucial. Cognitive empathy is purely intellectual, understanding the other person's perspective without necessarily feeling it. Think of a negotiator understanding their counterpart's position.
And emotional empathy is feeling resonance, literally feeling what they feel.
And the most actionable type, compassionate empathy, is feeling with them and being moved to help or take action based on that understanding. In terms of motivation, compassionate empathy helps leaders understand why their team is struggling and respond constructively.
And the final piece, social skills. This is where everything else becomes externally visible.
Social skills are the practical application of the other four components: effective communication, smooth conflict management, collaboration, and building genuine trust. These are the skills that lubricate social interactions and get people cooperating.
So what's the quantifiable, real-world payoff of developing this skill set? It sounds great, but does it work?
The payoffs are staggering, particularly in professional environments. Leaders with high EI are far better at inspiring, managing conflicts productively, and creating psychologically supportive environments, which is the perfect breeding ground for autonomy and relatedness from SDT.
Right, we saw that Google integrates EI into its leadership training, and that Fortune 500 company that saw team productivity jump by 15% and turnover drop by 10% after EI training. How does that 15% jump even happen?
It happens through better psychological safety. A high EI leader uses self-awareness to manage their own stress and self-regulation to avoid lashing out. They use empathy to understand hidden team conflicts. This creates an environment where team members aren't spending cognitive energy worrying about internal politics or avoiding the boss.
Which frees up that mental capacity for actual work.
Exactly. High EI fundamentally lowers internal workplace friction, and that translates directly to output.
That makes perfect sense. Less emotional drain equals more cognitive bandwidth for the task at hand. What about in our personal lives?
In personal relationships, EI dramatically strengthens connections. That study in the Journal of Family Psychology found couples with higher EI reported about 20% higher relationship satisfaction. They don't necessarily argue less, but they navigate disagreements better because they use empathetic listening and self-regulation.
And in education, this leads directly to the social-emotional learning programs we see gaining importance.
Exactly. SEL programs help students not just manage stress, but work better with others. That major meta-analysis found SEL boosted academic performance by an average of 11 percentile points. That Chicago school that cut disciplinary issues by 30% after implementing SEL saw those students achieve more because their emotional state, their navigation system, was finally stable.
And finally, EI acts as a significant emotional buffer for mental health.
It does. It boosts resilience and stress management capacity.
Yeah.
The source cited a study showing that EI training significantly reduced anxiety symptoms by about 25% in patients with generalized anxiety disorder. By increasing emotional awareness and teaching self-regulation coping strategies, EI helps individuals proactively mitigate their own anxiety spirals. It's a core skill set for emotional durability.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting for me. Focusing on the core internal block that stops us cold. The alarm system and the inner critic.
Okay.
Let's dive deeper into navigating fear and self-doubt.
We have to start with the amygdala's role. We referred to it earlier, but let's be specific. This almond-shaped cluster of neurons is the brain's immediate alert system. It's built for survival. So when you're facing a complex deadline, proposing a creative idea, or taking a major career leap, Your amygdala can interpret the inherent uncertainty and risk of failure as a physical threat.
It's the brain confusing a metaphorical threat with a literal one.
Yes. And it triggers the fight-or-flight response, flooding your system with cortisol and adrenaline, causing those physical symptoms. The racing heart, the tight stomach, the shallow breath. That rush of fear literally drains your capacity for rational action.
And that explains why, when fear ramps up, the amygdala signal can just completely drown out the prefrontal cortex, the rational planning voice.
Think of the amygdala like a screeching car alarm. When that alarm is going off at full volume, the delicate dashboard instruments of the PFC logic, planning, rational thought get completely ignored. That's when irrational thoughts like, I'm definitely going to mess this up, take over.
Leading to avoidance.
Leading to avoidance. The solution is consciously strengthening the communication pathway between the amygdala and the PFC using tools like mindfulness and cognitive reframing.
We also have to address that unique flavor of self-doubt that plagues high achievers.
Imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is that persistent internal experience of feeling like a fraud, despite having significant objective accomplishments. It was first described by psychologists Clance and Imes, and it affects successful people across every field.
So what are the key signs?
Attributing all success to external factors, luck, timing, charm, and the persistent, crushing fear of eventual exposure as incompetent. You minimize every achievement.
So if objective proof of success isn't enough to fight it, how do you actively push back?
It requires behavioral and cognitive changes. First, you have to consciously acknowledge accomplishments. Keep a running list, the confidence jar we'll talk about later, of what you've achieved, big or small. Reviewing this regularly provides tangible proof against the fake narrative your inner critic is spinning.
Okay.
Second, normalize the feeling. Realizing that the vast majority of successful people struggle with this exact same feeling is a massive relief. It depersonalizes the anxiety.
And critically, you have to actively reframe the success.
You must. When that thought pops up, that was just luck. You have to deliberately counter it out loud if you need to with the truth. No, I prepared thoroughly, I worked hard, and I earned this outcome. That conscious effort to claim ownership and rewrite the narrative is essential.
Let's move to direct, actionable strategies to engage fear, starting with exposure therapy or systematic desensitization.
This is a proven technique for reprogramming the amygdala. The goal isn't to eliminate fear, but to teach the brain that the situation is not catastrophic. You gradually face feared situations, building what's called a fear hierarchy.
A fear hierarchy.
You rank situations from 1, so least scary, totally manageable, to 10, panic attack territory.
Can you give us an example of how that works in practice?
Sure. Let's use the public speaking fear. Level 1 might be practicing in front of a mirror. Level 3 is practicing with one supportive friend. Level 6 is presenting the material to a small, friendly group. Level 8 might be presenting to colleagues, and Level 10 is the national conference.
And you only move up once you're comfortable at the current level.
Right. Each small positive exposure helps to desensitize the amygdala and reduces the irrational fear response over time.
A simpler in-the-moment anchor is the personal mantra.
A short, positive, empowering phrase. Progress, not perfection. I am prepared. One step at a time. That you deploy actively during stressful moments. It acts as a cognitive anchor, a verbal instruction that interrupts the amygdala's fear loop.
We also need tools for managing the physical sensations of fear, which are the self-regulation techniques.
These are designed specifically to calm your nervous system in real time. Progressive muscle relaxation involves systematically tensing and then releasing muscle groups sequentially, helping you consciously let go of the physical tension that fear locks into your body.
And for when the mind is racing and you feel disconnected from reality?
That's where grounding techniques come in. Offer the 5-4-3-2-1 method. You intentionally focus on 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. It pulls your focus forcefully back into the present moment.
And box breathing. This is incredibly effective for immediate physiological change.
Repeating the cycle, inhale 4, hold 4, exhale 4, hold 4 for just a few moments actively stimulates the vagus nerve, which significantly lowers your heart rate and reduces the acute stress response. These techniques are physical hacks to manage the biological side of fear.
Finally, we need to acknowledge that how fear and self-doubt manifest can be profoundly shaped by our cultural background.
This is a really nuanced area that informs strategy selection. In more collectivist cultures, where group harmony is highly valued, the fear of disappointing the group or losing face can be a far more significant driver of self-doubt than individual failure.
So if someone from a collectivist background is struggling with doubt, a strategy focusing purely on personal agency might just fail.
Exactly. Strategies should instead emphasize shared goals, the support of the community, and reframing a setback as a learning experience that benefits the entire group, not just the individual.
Conversely, in individualist cultures, where the focus is heavily on personal achievement, failure is internalized immediately and personally.
Here, strategies need to emphasize personal agency, celebrate individual achievements, and actively reframe setbacks as unique, personal learning experiences. Even communication styles matter. In high-context cultures, the fear of misinterpretation can fuel doubt. The point is, understanding your cultural background helps tailor truly effective, resonant strategies.
So what does this all mean? We've covered science, psychology, and the roadblocks. Now let's build a comprehensive, integrated toolkit, Section 5, for building and sustaining drive long-term.
We circle back to goal setting, but this time with the crucial understanding of how it impacts the PFC and anticipation. Goals must be SMART: specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. This framework transforms a vague desire into an executable plan.
So instead of "I want to get fit," the SMART goal is "I will jog for 20 minutes 3 times this week starting tomorrow." That's a fundamentally different internal commitment.
And once we have that goal, we must conquer the overwhelming feeling by breaking down the massive task into tiny components. This is leveraging a psychological trick, the Zeigarnik effect.
That's the idea that our brains have this mental tension from unfinished tasks, giving you that itch to return to them.
Precisely. And to leverage this, the rule is to make the first step ridiculously small. Don't aim to write the full report. Just open the document and write the heading. And studies show the effect is strongest when the task is interrupted. So start the task, make some progress for 15 minutes, and then intentionally stop mid-sentence.
You leave the mental loop open, creating that satisfying tension that pulls you back later. It's overcoming inertia by lowering the barrier to entry so much that the initial start requires virtually no motivation.
This ties directly into the power of habits, which James Clear writes about so effectively. Automating small behaviors reduces your reliance on fickle motivation. You don't need motivation to brush your teeth, you just do it.
Right.
We aim to make those productive behaviors just as automatic. Consistency builds its own momentum, regardless of how motivated you feel on any given day.
Let's look at some powerful hands-on exercises for resilience and overcoming fear, starting with Tim Ferriss's fear setting.
Fear setting is a structured way to take vague, paralyzing anxieties and make them concrete, engaging the rational prefrontal cortex. You write down the exact goal, and you follow 3 distinct sheets. Sheet 1. Define, in excruciating detail, the absolute worst-case scenario.
Okay.
Sheet 2. List preventative measures you can take to make those scenarios less likely. Sheet 3. List repair strategies. If the worst happens, how will it recover?
And what's the most crucial step?
The final critical step is listing the cost of inaction. What's the missed opportunity? What's the regret? Often, when you compare the usually manageable worst-case scenario to the severe and guaranteed cost of inaction, the decision to move forward becomes easy.
It shows you that the fears are far less probable and catastrophic than they felt when they were just abstract.
Exactly.
The confidence jar, or success journal, provides that physical, undeniable record of capabilities we mentioned for tackling low self-efficacy.
Every day, you jot down one small thing you did well. I spoke up in the meeting. I managed my time effectively today. Reviewing this jar weekly or monthly is crucial. It's your undeniable evidence file that directly counters the narrative of self-doubt.
And for those high-stress moments, role-playing scenarios.
Practicing stressful situations, a crucial interview, a difficult negotiation beforehand with a trusted friend or coach, significantly reduces anxiety. You're exposing yourself to the stress in a controlled environment, reducing uncertainty, and feeling far more prepared.
Now let's talk about cultivating the necessary mindset, focusing on EI development. First, the vital practice of self-compassion.
This is non-negotiable for long-term drive. When we struggle, our inner critic often goes into overdrive, shouting, "You're a failure, you should quit." Research by Kristen Neff shows that treating yourself with kindness and understanding when you struggle, like you would a dear friend, actually builds sustainable resilience.
Kindness, not harsh criticism, is the necessary fuel for sustainable change.
It really is.
How do we actively cultivate empathy and perspective-taking in the context of motivation?
Active listening is fundamental. Really focus on the speaker, avoid formulating your response, and paraphrase back what you heard. For deeper perspective taking, try writing out a conflict scenario entirely from someone else's point of view, the boss, the customer, the colleague. This builds cognitive empathy by bridging gaps in understanding.
And finally, building a growth mindset based on Carol Dweck's work.
The core belief that your abilities are not fixed, that success isn't proof of inherent talent, but proof of dedication and effort. With a growth mindset, challenges are seen not as threats, but as opportunities to learn. When facing a setback, you consciously ask, what data can I gather from this? What can I learn?
It shifts the focus from failure to progress.
Entirely.
For long-term sustainability, we need practices that automate the momentum. Accountability partners seem simple, but their effect on commitment is powerful.
Sharing your goal with a trusted person and asking them to check in creates commitment and external pressure. That simple act of stating your intention puts you on the hook.
And small reward systems provide that basic positive reinforcement.
Right, which reinforces the dopamine anticipation loop. A small, immediate, predetermined reward upon task completion.
A favorite song after finishing a tough email.
Yes, a nice cup of tea after the first 30 minutes of deep work. It creates an immediate, positive feedback loop that helps train the seeking part of your brain.
And regular reflection is key because motivation naturally ebbs and flows.
Schedule 10 minutes weekly to journal specifically about your drive. Ask, what strategies worked this week? What triggered dips in my motivation? What should I try differently next week? Being intentional about checking in allows you to understand your own patterns and proactively adjust your strategies.
And a daily gratitude practice.
Consistently focusing on your strengths and resources, what you do have, what you have accomplished, rather than dwelling on perceived inadequacies, helps shift your perspective away from self-doubt and provides a foundational positivity that supports resilience and energy.
We saw several powerful case studies throughout our sources that illustrate combining these strategies into an integrated approach.
Oh yeah, look at Priya, who was paralyzed by the fear of pitching her social justice ideas. She used the fear-setting technique to demystify the worst-case scenario, then engaged in exposure therapy by starting with small pitches to internal groups.
She used a mantra in her support networks.
Right. She adopted a mantra to interrupt her inner critic and leveraged her support networks for relatedness. And she explicitly reframed rejection, not as personal failure, but as necessary data gathering. She was addressing her fear by looking at her values and using the practical tools of resilience.
And James, the manager who struggled with persistent self-doubt despite success.
James focused heavily on the EI components. He used cognitive reframing to challenge his irrational thoughts, built a confidence jar to gather undeniable evidence of his competence, and actively sought constructive team feedback to build genuine earned confidence.
So it's clear that finding the right mix of strategies, addressing the issue from every angle, biology, psychology, environment, is the most powerful approach to sustainable drive.
Absolutely. You have to become a detective about your own system.
So we've taken the deep dive, we've explored the brain, the psychological frameworks, the deep internal roadblocks, and this actionable toolkit. What is the core integrated takeaway for the listener right now?
I think the absolute core message is this. Feeling unmotivated or doubtful is complex. It's an intricate dynamic dance between your biology, your psychology, your environment, and your social connections. It is not a fixed trait. It's a muscle that can be developed and cultivated through intentional, small, consistent effort.
So the essential first step is becoming that detective and figuring out the specific why behind the slump. Is it genuinely unclear goals, which you can fix with smart planning? Is it chronic stress and lack of sleep, which requires physical recovery? Or is it a cognitive distortion, which requires an immediate challenge?
Yes. Rebuilding drive requires self-awareness, intentional effort, and the courage to implement that multi-pronged toolkit.
And maybe the final provocative thought to mull over as you transition back to your day is this. If fear is often pointing you directly toward what matters most to you, what specific opportunity or goal is your fear telling you right now that you truly value?
And what opportunity might just open up if you dare to take one ridiculously small step beyond the edge of your comfort zone today? The power is entirely in starting small and staying consistent.